It's time for another underrated cards video. This time we're looking at EX Dragon. As the name suggests, this set was based around dragon type Pokemon. So there are some good ones, some bad ones, and some that are underrated. As per tradition for these videos, let's start with the best cards in EX Dragon. On the dragon type side, I'm going to say Rayquaza EX, Kingdra EX, and Salamence are all phenomenal cards that fit particular niches in the metagame. Also want to include Magneton as being an amazing support Pokemon that goes into a ton of decks, and TV Reporter for being one of the best supporter cards in the EX era and one of my all-time favorites. For the worst card in set, I have to dunk on Golem EX. Look at those attack costs, look at that double weakness, look at that retreat cost! Even after loading up all the energy onto this card, you're still dealing damage to either all of your Pokemon or 50 damage to yourself, which is not great because this is a 2-prize Pokemon. It's real bad. So now let's move on to the underrated cards. And today I'd like to start with Buffer Piece. Yeah, I know Buffer Piece is not competitively viable, it's just a new version of Defender, but this card does have a special place in my TCG heart because for any deck that takes a few turns to get set up, this can be your only protection against aggro. It can mediate damage from decks that like to snowball like Medicham, or even start to slow down or buy you an extra turn on hyper-aggressive decks like Shiftry. If you know the metagame that you're playing in well, you can actually utilize Buffer Piece to gain huge advantage early game. This can even significantly slow down Gorebyss decks, and it got reprinted, so you're going to see Buffer Piece throughout the EX era for a reason. It's a great card to assist new players that are just learning the game how to deal with that rapid-fire damage early game, or provide a means of survival late game to initiate a comeback. Buffer Piece isn't an amazing card, but I like it and I think it's underrated. Next up on my list is the Poison Claws Crawdaunt. If you have watched any of these underrated card videos, you know that I have a soft spot for water types with simple attacks. Going all the way back to Jungle Sea King, these types of Pokemon are not the focus of the deck. They're not going to be winning you any games, but they sure as hell put in the work and get you a solid setup. This Crawdaunt is a stage 1 80 HP, not a lot to write home about there. For 1 energy you can deal 10 damage and you have a 50% chance of inflicting poison. Whether or not you hit that poison, you're going to be able to get double damage off of Rend on your next turn. Though it does help a ton if you do hit heads and inflict that poison, because poison is not something your opponent's going to be expecting from a water type deck. 60 damage for 3 energy is not spectacular, but that damage can stack up if you are able to inflict damage, and that's how I view this card as a whole, as the 1-2 punch that you're getting between Poison Claws and Rend. It's probably no surprise that Ninjask also made my list of underrated cards from Dragon. I absolutely love playing decks that center around mechanics like Baby Porter or Rapid Spin, where you're hitting your opponent, retreating to the bench, and forcing them to attack some dummy that they're not going to get a prize for. For 2 colorless energy, Quick Touch is going to deal 30 damage. Ninjask moves to the bench, and if you want to, you can move a grass energy from Ninjask onto the new active Pokemon. So even if you're not playing with just like fossils or dummy Pokemon, you can put a huge EX into the active position and move a grass energy onto it. A little bit of acceleration there. Plus it has free retreat, and its Pokepower Loose Shell gives you an extra Pokemon straight into play from your deck. Just by evolving, you get to thin your deck, grab a Shedinja, and put it straight onto your bench. Very underrated power here. So Shedinja also gets a shout out for being an underrated card from EX Dragon. Its Wonder Guard Pokebody can actually completely wall a lot of decks in the early EX formats. Formats highly centered around Pokemon EX and evolved Pokemon. Wonder Guard prevents effects of attacks, including damage, done to Shedinja from your opponent's evolved Pokemon and Pokemon EX, forcing them to rely on smaller attacks from unevolved Pokemon, which are very easy to maneuver around and heal off that damage from Shedinja from turn to turn, especially if you're using cards like Buffer Piece. You guys know about Buffer Piece? I have two separate builds of a Ninjask deck and a Shedinja deck already up on the channel, so go check those out if you're interested in how these two cards play separate from one another. Girafarig! What a great support Pokemon. We're not even going to talk about Breaking Impact just because there's not a ton of high retreat cost Pokemon in the EX formats. But Synchronized Surge. If Girafarig and the defending Pokemon have the same amount of energy attached to them, pick any one card from your deck and put it into your hand. It is stupid hard to beat Dunsparce as the premier starting support Pokemon for any deck, but this does come close. If you are starting with this Pokemon and you have one energy attached, your opponent's also only going to have one energy attached unless they just straight up skipped their first energy attachment, and Girafarig is going to let you search your deck for any card that you want. Any. No limitation. If it is in your deck, you can go grab it. Put it straight into your hand. The reason Dunsparce is so good is because it lets you grab multiple cards, though it is limited to basic Pokemon, and then it retreats to your bench, putting another Pokemon in the active position and protecting that Dunsparce. Girafarig isn't going to do that, but still, there aren't a lot of decks in the EX era that are more trainer focused than Pokemon focused. That is why this Girafarig did not see play and does not see play, but for any rogue deck, for someone very knowledgeable in the metagame, to where turn one you can see what your opponent is starting with, you respond by going, I have the perfect counter to that in my deck, I'm going to go grab that right now. The other reason this Girafarig didn't see play is because there was just so much draw power in the EX era that whatever you wanted from your deck, you could easily draw into it with a variety of different supporter and trainer cards. But man, just something about that line of text, pick any one card from your deck and put it in your hand, that is powerful and should not be overlooked or underrated. Magikarp is not on my underrated list for EX Dragon, but I did want to make note of its Call for Family attack, as it does function differently than most other Call for Family. This one, instead of naming a specific number of basic Pokemon you can grab, it just says go get every other Magikarp from your deck and put them directly into play. It's also a nice segue into an honorable mention, because Gyarados was originally on my underrated list just because of the wording on this Dragon Crush attack. For 1 energy, flip a coin. If heads, this attack does 10 damage to each defending Pokemon. Then, it's completely separate from the coin flip, discard an energy card from each defending Pokemon. As the attack reads, you should be discarding an energy regardless of the coin flip outcome. However, this was a mistranslation. The official ruling is that both of these effects are linked to the coin flip. So as soon as I found that out, this card was dropped from the underrated list. Another Stage 1 does make the list. Altaria, for 1 energy you can Dragon Dance, and during your next turn, any of your current active Pokemon does 40 extra damage. Another card worded for doubles, but on your next turn, for 2 energy you can use Dragon Song for 70 damage, and the active Pokemon is automatically asleep. No coin flip involved. Compared to other Pokemon that have this built-in 1-2 punch, this is a bit slow, but you are getting automatic sleep off of your Dragon Song, which is hopefully buying you that extra turn to do a Dragon Dance in between each of your Dragon Songs. And while you're doing this and racking up damage, Dragon Song has a very energy efficient cost of only 2, so this is going to give you the opportunity to start loading up other Pokemon on your bench as well. The double resistance and low retreat cost isn't bad either. The card's just a little bit slower than your other big dragon types from this set because of having to take every other turn off to Dragon Dance. Not that you always have to do it, sometimes you just want to stack damage and get automatic sleep for 2 energy, which is why I like this card. You have the option to Dragon Dance and deal more damage, but you also have the option to just go 30 damage sleep, 30 damage sleep. The final card on my list for today is also a dragon type. Latios EX, it's a 100 HP basic, double resistance. For 1 colorless energy, Energy Stream deals 10 damage. You flip a coin. If heads, you can accelerate an energy from your discard onto Latios EX. It's always nice to have a 1 energy attack on a big basic. Then for a grass, a lightning, and a colorless, you deal 100 damage and discard 3 energy attached to Latios. With the help of a coin flip off of Energy Stream, you're able to do this on turn 2, which can be huge. 100 damage on turn 2 is amazing. Not to mention that grass and electric decks both have means of energy acceleration that they can help Latios with by just recharging it after every single attack. However, the reason that Latios EX is on this underrated list is because it's in the same set as Rayquaza EX. Though similar, Rayquaza is just better. the water resistance is way more relevant than Latios' grass resistance. Rayquaza has a higher potential damage output, and it gets to benefit from Blaziken's Fire Starter ability. Latios EX would have seen a ton of play if Rayquaza EX didn't exist. It just gets out-dragoned. But if for any reason you're running a grass and lightning type deck, I think it's worth chucking in one copy of Latios just as a backup attacker. That is my list of underrated cards for EX Dragon. Let me know what you thought down in the comments. Let me know your agreements and disagreements. Are there cards that should have been on this list that I completely overlooked? If you like what I do here on the channel, please tell a friend. I am trying to grow and do even more content-wise, so any suggestions for future content are greatly appreciated. I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.